Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at Secular AZ today. Again, feel free to put your name in the chat. We are a nonprofit organization focused on protecting the Constitution and the separation of church and state for over a decade. We have some incredible programming, including our Friday updates from all kinds of amazing speakers. Next Friday, because of all the events we have going on, we're going to be taking a little break because we'll be at the Pride event on Friday and Saturday. And again, I already mentioned the co-hosting event, that event that I mentioned with Amanda Tyler. It's co-hosted by Arizona Faith Network and a few other organizations that are slipping my mind right now, but the link is in the chat, so you can take a look at that yourself. And then after that, this is pretty much the last in our series of religious groomers and abuse that happens within religious organizations. And after that, we're going to be kicking off another themed series about Christian homosexuals and their obsession with guns with some really incredible speakers. So I hope that you'll support the work that we do. Secularaz.org, you can become a member, become a recurring donor to support our work at the legislature, at school boards, with our action alerts, etc. And I went to the Peoria Unified School District meeting last night, and folks, it was a doozy. So we also have started a Substack, and I monitored what happened in Scottsdale Unified this past week, and I'll have another write-up about what happened in Peoria Unified, and these folks are showing up, so we need you to show up too. But anyway, today let's get to it because I'm super excited. This is such a great way for us to close this series. Today we're going to be speaking with Michael Harvey. He is an Amazon bestselling author of Let's Talk, a Rabbi Speaks to Christians, an ordained rabbi. He has led congregations and served as a hospital chaplain. Rabbi Mike is passionate about social justice, interfaith cooperation, and bringing deep Jewish learning to the lay public. He has followed these passions in serving his community, including founding and directing the Interfaith Council of the Caribbean, as well as directing the interfaith leaders of Greater Lafayette, and that's Lafayette, Indiana. He also serves on the Rabbinic Advisory Council of the American Jewish Archives. I mean, it's quite the resume. Is there anything in that introduction that maybe I missed, something in your resume that you want to add?
I think I'll probably mention a couple things, but that was wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I'm just going to let you go ahead. Oh, and by the way, I want to also point out, if you are on Twitter, you should definitely follow Rabbi Mike. He throws all kinds of shade to all kinds of people who deserve it, and I am here for it. So go ahead, Rabbi Mike.
Thank you so much. That's like the best introduction, I think, is the shade on Twitter. In all seriousness, though, I do stand up for those who are being oppressed, who are being bullied, doxxed by whether it be Christian nationalism or white supremacists or anything like that. I'm not afraid to bring my receipts as someone who has an expertise in biblical text, Jewish and Christian alike. So I just want to mention most of this is in my book, of course, but I've had a passion for interfaith work for my entire adult life, even before seminary, during seminary, and after. I've broken a few molds, being, the first Jewish chaplain in 40 years somewhere, heads of the interfaith councils. I've been, the state legislatures always know who I am because I'm always doing something up there. So when I had the opportunity to come and speak about this, something that it's very close to my heart, I definitely wanted to do it. In speaking with Secular AZ, we talked about some options about what to talk about, and I know that you guys just had Chrissy on last time, and that she is just an incredible resource on grooming and other fundamentalist aspects. What I wanted to talk about today was more in terms of the religious hypocrisy that's happening when we look at those who are anti-LGBTQ using and abusing texts from the Jewish texts, and then all of that goes in that. So within the hour, what I'm going to try to do is go over some of the things that and I want to make sure that I'm careful. I'm not going to say Christians, but certain Christians. Obviously, I don't want to paint a wide brush, but the certain Christians, you know who they are, are glossing over, are pulling out, are missing interpretations. And it doesn't take that much once you know this stuff to be able to say, well, that's just baloney. So I've written a couple articles on that. Some of that will be in here, but it's certainly a passion of mine. So before I begin, please let me know if there are any quick questions or any quick logistic announcements, and then I will share my screen.
Yeah, so if you do have questions, folks, you can put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to monitor that, and we'll answer them as we go along. So go ahead, Rabbi Mike, take it away.
Okay, wonderful. What I'm going to do is bring up a PowerPoint presentation, and I want to make sure everybody can see it. So if you guys just give me a yes, we see it, or a thumbs up or something. Great. Okay,
Good.
wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. So when it comes to the biblical arguments against LGBTQIA or LGBTQ+, they stem from Jewish texts in the Torah specifically. There are other texts that touch on other issues that are used and abused for things like abortion, gun violence, all that sort of stuff. But today we're going to focus on those with the LGBTQIA. So whenever I talk about this, whenever I'm teaching on it, my first question about Jewish texts is, why do Christians even care? Right? It's well known that within certain denominations, within the 40,000 denominations of Christianity in the world, that the ideas of the New Testament are, Jesus fulfills them. They are a burden. They're a yoke. So those first two quotes, Matthew and John, and then that's built into a different canon and Christian scripture and Christian interpretation that you basically ignore those. Some of them, certain denominations ignore some of them ignore all of them. So keeping kosher, the Jewish practices, all those sort of things have been sort of pushed away. The problem with that is there isn't anything specific in the New Testament that goes against LGBTQIA. Not anything that Jesus has said. There is one verse or one aspect by Paul in 1 Corinthians, where he's talking about sexual immorality, but he's not specific on what that sexual immorality is. So that particular verse only stands if they use the verses from what Christians call the Old Testament. Otherwise, it could mean anything. There's all kinds of sexual immorality from Paul's point of view, from Christianity's point of view, whatever that is. So the main thing I argue right away is, if you're going to argue that the Old Testament is old, it's outdated, this is a new covenant, we don't do those things anymore, then you can't go back and pull them back and say, except for these. That's beyond cherry picking. And so that to me is the first thing when you're encountering this is the first hypocrisy, right? Is you say, Jews are, they're the old custom, they need to convert, they're not fulfilled, we don't use their book anymore, those laws don't apply, etc., except here. And then when you add the 1 Corinthians, you're building something on basically that's on sand. Any questions, comments on that first major hypocrisy?
No questions so far.
Okay, thank you. The next hypocrisy is biblical literalism. Biblical literalism is pretty endemic in terms of certainly the most fundamentalist aspects of Christianity. But like most things, right, it is certainly hypocritical and simply untrue. So the one thing that Jews are used to hearing from missionaries, proselytizing, right, is that there are these obvious hints of Jesus in the Old Testament. There's hints of Satan. There's hints of his birth and his coming. Right? They're so obvious. How can you not see them? Right? These are things that are under the text. They are, but if you understand them through a Christian point of view, then obviously it makes sense, and all that sort of stuff. A Jew like myself, a rabbi, encountering fundamentalist Christians like that, is I say, well, if you are a biblical literalist, there is no mention of Jesus in the Old Testament whatsoever, right? We have to see his name, right? So if the entirety of Christian theology is based upon interpretation, hint, looking under the surface, reading between the lines to find Jesus, why is that not the case in other aspects as well? Right? Why would a certain verse definitely mean Jesus, although not mention him, and another verse you read straightforward, right? A man shall not lie with a man as it does with a woman, and that's it. There's nothing more to it. There's nothing about context. There's nothing about interpretation. There's nothing about the time. There's nothing, right? So Christian biblical literalism, right, is very selective, right? But I find it certainly extremely apocryphal, considering that that is the basis of bringing the Old Testament to the New Testament, is hints and interpretation and things like that. So when it comes to biblical literalism from my text in the Old Testament, or the Tanakh as we call it, Christians call it the Old Testament, the rabbis and the sages and the interpreters have been doing interpretation and study for 3,000 years. And so nothing is literal to us. Everything has a yes, but, or a no, but, or something like that. And I'm not sure how Christians that we're speaking about will not allow themselves to do the same on these verses. That's not true. I know exactly why, but in a rational way, why would they not do this? So before we move on to Sodom, anything in the chats?
Nothing so far.
Good. I love
there's a comment, and
okay.
I mean, I like this. Apparently Christians love the Old Testament. They insist on posting the 10 Commandments in schools. Just a comment.
Oh, 100%. And I did a great thread on that on Twitter, that there's actually 3 sets of 10 Commandments in the Bible, and so you can't just pick one and use that English interpretation. Anyway, thank you for that comment. Okay, the number one thing that you will see, whether it be on a sign from a particular preacher or priest or whatever it is, or on social media, is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, or Sodom for short, right? At a certain point, it's referred to as just Sodom in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament. And specifically, they use these verses from Genesis, and hopefully some of you know the story, right? That Lot is there, and the men of Sodom come out and say, bring out those visitors, those angels, whatever, who happen to be male, so that we can forcibly have sex with them, right? Basically, so we can rape them. And in an act of pure sexual morality, according to these Christians, Lot sends his daughters out instead to be raped, which I guess is not a problem for them. But later, right, God is talking about the sin of Sodom, right? And before I get to where the sin of Sodom became homosexuality, I want to take you on a small little journey as to if you just read further into the Bible, the answer becomes quite clear. So the main verses that they're going to use, right, besides the story itself, about the sin of Sodom, right, is Genesis 13:12, Genesis 18:20, right? He's talking about the inhabitants of Sodom were very wicked sinners against Adonai, or the Lord, right? Doesn't say why, it's not unclear. He says just they were wicked, okay? Genesis 18:20, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin is so great. Those particular Christians love this because they hammer it in. It's a terrible, terrible sin, right? Not that Lot threw out his daughters, right? But that they wanted to have sex with these angels who happened to be men. So we leave that story and Sodom and Gomorrah gets destroyed, right? And there's nothing really more said about that. It moves on to the next chapter, and Abraham continues his journey. Though I will say one thing, Abraham is arguing with God about, what if there's only 10 righteous people, or there was 100, there was 50, there was 10, right? Do the readers truly believe that everyone in Sodom was homosexual, and that if they were just to find 10 heterosexuals, he would save the city? No, of course not. That's not what we're talking about. That's completely illogical and irrational, right? So later, the prophets have plenty to say about Sodom. So if you read Isaiah 1:9, right, and Isaiah is talking about them, right, Israel and Judah and those kingdoms and that sort of stuff. And he says, had not, God left us some survivors, we would be like Sodom and other Gomorrah, right? Meaning it was destroyed. You chieftains of Sodom, here we're using it as a metaphor, right? Or a simile rather, saying like you're being like Sodom, Israel. The Jews are acting like Sodom, right? Give ear to God's instruction, you folk of Gomorrah. Obviously, at this point, Sodom and Gomorrah have been destroyed 1,000 years ago, right? But they're using this to describe as a sort of an insult, right? Isaiah is using this as an insult to say, hey, you Sodom, right? Gomorrah, that's who you are, right? Now, Isaiah is not preaching against homosexuality here, right? He's talking about how Israel has gone astray, how Israel has involved themselves in idolatry, worshiping other gods, things like that, right? Isaiah continues a couple chapters later, right? And still is talking about Israel and Judah, right? They avow their sins like Sodom. They don't conceal them, right? All their sins that they have, they're out in the open, right? It doesn't say they're all gay. It says this sin, right? Whatever this is, right? Later, he says, Babylon, our enemy, right, who came in and actually did destroy Judah in 586, right? Don't worry, they're going to become like Sodom and Gomorrah, right? They're going to be destroyed. Again, it's very open, very vague, okay? Jeremiah later comes in and says some stuff too, right? Jerusalem's not doing well, right? Here's what he says. Jerusalem is something horrifying. Adultery and false dealing. They encourage evildoers so that no one turns back from his wickedness. To me, they are all like Sodom, right? And all its habits of Gomorrah. You'll notice that Jeremiah does not say they are having homosexual sex, they are doing sexual immorality, right? They are encouraging evildoers, adultery, and false dealing. I just want to mention, by the way, adultery in Judaism is equivalent to idolatry because it's supposed to be this relationship between the Jewish people and God. That's why adultery, when we read into the 10 Commandments, isn't so much about cheating on your wife. Adultery is also cheating on God in that way. And Jeremiah 49:18, it shall be like the overthrow of Sodom. No man shall live there, no human shall sojourn there. Again, the reader is supposed to know what the sin of Sodom is, right? They've read Isaiah, they've read Genesis, in theory, parts of Genesis, and the reader at that time knows what's going on here. But the real question is, that is not said explicitly anywhere, is what is the sin of Sodom? Apparently, we were not the only ones to have this question. So later, we bring up Ezekiel. And this is really where it gets interesting with those people talking about sodomy and homosexuality, because Ezekiel, or the author of Ezekiel, has seen that there is this ambiguity, this vagueness about the sin of Sodom, what it was, right? But there was never any clarity about it. So Ezekiel puts it down straight out, 1648. As I live, your sister Sodom and her daughters did not do what you and your daughters did. 49, Ezekiel 16:49, my friends. Only this was the sin of Sodom, arrogance. She and her daughters had plenty of bread and untroubled tranquility, yet she did not support the poor and the needy. Clear as day, the sin of Sodom was not homosexuality, which there's long histories about. It wasn't rape. It wasn't, someone giving their daughters away or sleeping with a stranger, which was very, just accepted in ancient Near East. It was arrogance. It was inhospitality, right? They'll return to their former state. Your daughters shall return, right? Was not your sister Sodom in the mouth of the days of your pride, right? They were too prideful to provide hospitality to people. That is why they were destroyed. That is why they were evil. They were encouraging evildoers, and Ezekiel puts it out. So the real question we have for these people is, did you just not read the rest of the Bible? Because this prophet of God tells you directly what the sin of Sodom was. You can't just ignore that if you're going to just, certainly if you're not a biblical literalist, right? And certainly not if you understand the prophets to be sort of a step forward towards Jesus. So that is clear as day and is absolutely hypocritical for anyone to say the sin of Sodom was homosexuality. Where that came from, I'm going to show you in a moment, but let me pause for a moment because that was a lot of information. Questions?
Let's see. We don't have questions so much as we have comments. I just commented. Lindsay says these are such great rebuttals to because the Bible says so.
Right.
And I said I posted the Ezekiel 16:48 so that you can use that at the Thanksgiving dinner table with your angry uncle. Megan says words. What are they? With a smiley face. Yes, knowing what is in the NT and Tanakh is critical to explaining why someone's wrong about their own religion. And she's speaking as an ex-Christian Jew. New Mexico Skies says arrogance and inhospitality. Gosh, why is that such a hard word for me to say? Who does that sound like today? Well, we know. It sounds like the people who are sitting at the dais at the Peoria Unified School Board meetings who are reading scripture and violating their oath to the Constitution is what it sounds like. So anyway, back to you.
Great comments. Glad we're all on the same page. Now, you may be wondering, where the heck did it come from that Sodom, the sin of Sodom, may represented homosexuality? It didn't come from Judaism. It doesn't explicitly say it in either testament. So where did it come from? Well, as most things in religions such as Christianity, it came from a political force for a political reason. This one came about in the 6th century. Remember, the Gospels are written first century, right? Into the beginning of the 2nd century, right? 3rd century, you've got Christianity starting to form a little bit politically and separate itself. The 6th century is the first time we hear the term sodomite of Justinian, Emperor Justinian Corpus Civilis. Not a priest, not a preacher, not Jesus, not a gospel writer, an emperor says this. And if you read what it's about, right, when you get down to his writing, Benedictus Levita, right, he broadens the meaning for sodomy to all sexual acts not related to procreation and therefore deemed counter nature. This is the first time this is put into law, the first time this is interpreted that way from a high-standing, powerful person, right? And why? Because they want you to have children. They want this to be the nature of building your society, all that sort of stuff. Justinian was not happy with homosexual behavior, and this is what he writes. He even says, of course, they ignore this also, even solitary masturbation and anal intercourse between a male and a female were covered in this as well, right? Which they, of course, ignore. But Justinian specifically emphasized these acts taking between human men and women, not taking place between human men and women, especially homosexuality. In other words, Justinian is the first homophobe, right? He doesn't like homosexuality. He has the power to change it. He does. And this is what sticks. This is where we get the term sodomite. In my point of view, as many of you have agreed, the term sodomite should be someone who is arrogant and inhospitable, right? That should be the term sodomite. Instead, you have the term sodomy, sodomite, all referring to homosexual behavior, specifically anal intercourse. Why? Because of this, right? It's now everywhere. It's now put into the dictionary as what sodomy means, whether for better or for worse. Why? Because of a emperor, right, who wrote Benedictus Levita and made it law. That's how powerful this stuff is. It stuck, and it was that way forward. If you think about the anti-LGBTQ as at the top of a Jenga tower, right? Where we are today, and you follow it down, all the way down, it starts with this, right? Now, if we were to look back at what we just did and mention Ezekiel and mention all this other stuff, right? We'd slide that bar out of there, and that whole tower starts to shake and shimmy and would eventually fall down, because it's based on something that is not theological. It's not based on anything biblical. It's simply based on a political action that happened to be under Christian influence. So really important. Okay, before we go to the clobber passages, questions, comments?
Well, I have a question. Okay, and I was raised in essentially an agnostic household. My parents let me, my older sisters didn't look out like I did, but I didn't have to go to church, whatever. I'm not great with like knowing the Bible like the back of my hand, like so many of our members are, because they went through that evangelical kind of life. Is there anything that's said about children and sexual behavior with children at all? Like, is there? I mean, I know that the age of consent back then was very, very different, but I just
yes. You're right. The age of consent in the ancient Near East was basically whatever. Women were at that point, and children were property. So the rules of what marriage was meant something completely different, right? It was a financial exchange. It was a political move. It was to get your, this or whatever. So if your daughter's 20 or 15 or 10, it doesn't matter. It's a business transaction. So no, if within the ancient Near East, there isn't anything about that, because that's simply how it was. And we're not talking about pedophilia in this case. We're talking about ancient Near Eastern customs, which were different from our own. I'm not aware of anything within the New Testament either. Later in Jewish texts and commentaries, obviously they're certainly in the Mishnah and the Talmud and the things that are 5th century and things like that are addressed. And then much later, obviously, when Judaism responds to modernity and sees what's going on, and then creates new, and now it's, no way against, you have to be an adult, and there's all these things. But that's from my knowledge as a Jewish scholar. I can only speculate that there is a lack of that, considering what I have seen in history in certain Christian denominations. But if there's anyone who can give us a little more info, I'm certainly open to it, and I'd love to hear about it. But the main point I want to add there is that it was not a religious decision to make Sodom and sodomy, an abomination, a sin. That was a political move by one mind that has simply stuck. So the next thing you're going to hear from those who are vehemently anti-LGBTQ is what we call the clobber passages. We call them clobber passages because they have caused serious harm for millennia. And here they are. So first you have Leviticus 18:22. which is roughly translated as "do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is abhorrence." You may have heard it's an abomination, that sort of thing. The word to'eva, which is this word here, second to last from the left there, means something that is bad, basically, in Judaism. And then you have it repeated in Leviticus 20:13, only a little bit different, right? And this one is a little bit relevant to that question about children, right? You would see it in an English translation: if a man lies with a man as one lies with a woman, the two of them have done an abhorrent thing, they should be put to death, their blood guilt is upon them. This is where you get those horrible people saying they want to stone homosexuals, they want to kill them, they deserve death, all that sort of stuff. It comes from this verse. Now, before we go into all of the context and all the stuff as to why you can't just pull these out, the main thing I want to discuss for Leviticus 20:13, and this goes back to the idea that I'm asking Christians who are biblical literalists, who see hints in my texts about Jesus, when you read the Hebrew of this one, you have two distinct words for the word man, right? You have ish right here in the red, asher yishkav et, and then the second one, zachar, a male. Now, biblical literalist or not, you cannot ignore that the biblical author has used two different words here, right? For all the hints and all the in-depth and all the interpretation that those Christians do, this is something that you cannot ignore, right? A zachar could mean something that's very different from an ish, right? A zachar could be a boy, it could be a different kind of man that we're not really sure why ish and zachar are split up. But this author of Leviticus 20, which is obviously different than the one from Leviticus 18, right, who only uses the word zachar, right, wants to distinguish these two things. So we are not talking about a man lying with a man. We are talking about two different kinds of men, right, as one lies with a woman. Otherwise, it would say v'ish asher yishkav et ish, right? If a man lies with a man, it doesn't say that. So your eyebrows should raise. You should start to be suspicious about maybe there's something more about this. The one thing I'll say about in terms of why a lot of Christians don't see this, because a lot of Christians don't read the Hebrew. In fact, they only read the Greek and then the Latin from the Septuagint to the Vulgate up into the 1950s in terms of the Catholic priest, right? The Catholic Church, which is insane, going that long without ever going back to the original text, right? Say nothing of the fact that the Septuagint was translated from a different manuscript than the one that was translated from the Jewish Torah. There's all these problems in terms of the ambiguity of Hebrew, all things that are ignored. If you're reading it in English, you miss those ambiguity, those issues that you would say something's up. This is different, right? Why is it saying this? Those questions simply aren't being asked. In the Jewish world, of course, they are. Questions?
There's one question here. So, and I don't know if it's more rhetorical or what, but it's a great question. Can a male also be interpreted as a male animal? You know,
Not particularly. There are separate words for beasts or animals. Zachar specifically, at least according to what we know of the context, always refers to a human male of some kind. It is not a adjective to distinguish a male something. It is the word that embodies human. But it is a good question, right? And those are the kind of questions that we want to be asking, right? When we're looking at a Hebrew text, right? Is not saying, oh, okay, this is it, done, right? So we should be suspicious right away. Here's some reasons why. If you're just using these two texts, right? Forget Paul at this point, forget, Sodom or whatever it is. There are more kinds of LGBTQ plus activity that's going on in the ancient Near East. That's just how there were. There was lesbianism, there was bisexuality, there was transgender. Judaism recognizes at least 9 different genders during that time. None of them are prohibited in the Torah explicitly, or the Bible for that matter. We're only talking about a man onto a different kind of man. Now, if we look at it from this perspective, it doesn't say man to man. It says this particular kind of coupling is the sin. This is an abomination. The other thing is the word mishkaveh, isha, right? It doesn't actually mean in the manner of, or it can mean in the manner of. It also can mean after the manner of lying with a woman. So if I go back to you guys here, right? And in the first one, Leviticus 18:22, Ve'et zachar lo tishkav, here we go, mishkaveh isha, right? Do not lie with a zachar as one would, or after one lies with a woman. So again, ambiguity, sometimes it meant in the manner of, or as one, and sometimes it means after. The reason why it was chosen, humans decided to translate it that way. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. So again, when you're building that Jenga tower, my job is to pull that one out and let it waver a little bit and say, well, now what do you think? So that's one of the things to focus on. A wonderful textual critic and biblical interpreter, Robert Alter, if you have his commentary on the Tanakh, it's simply incredible. The bedding that they're talking about here in terms of to bed with or lie with, right, refers to sexual intercourse, but it doesn't say how, right? It doesn't say anal intercourse. It doesn't say intercrural, which means between the legs, which, by the way, is practiced all the time, right? Canaanites, Greeks, Amorites, Hittites, all of them had intercrural intercourse. And it doesn't say how. They had sex with men, they had sex with women, whatever it is. And it doesn't specifically say that. So again, you have to really focus on the ambiguity here. There's nothing clear here. And why would this be something that we want to focus on? Because if you look at what the Israelite leaders were attempting to do during the ancient Near East, they were trying to separate Israelites from their neighbors. Why? Well, for one thing, Israelite and Canaanite archaeology are exactly the same, except for the Torah. In other words, you can't tell the difference between Canaanite and Israelite. So the building of the Torah, the building of this people, is the only thing that pulls them away and separates them. The second thing is they're surrounded by all these nations who have their own gods, multiple gods, right? There are wonderful theories that I support and scholarship that I support that the ideas of kosher, being kosher and kashrut law was simply to keep them away from the other peoples around. If you can't have an Amorite over for dinner, or you can't eat at an Amorite's house because your dietary restrictions are different, then they can't marry your daughter. You can't worship other gods. It's actually a brilliant idea. It's the same thing that we see in Leviticus against tattoos. Tattoos were all over the ancient Near East. The Israelites wanted to distinguish themselves, so they said no tattoos. So in this case, they are most likely talking about an ancient Near Eastern practice that the peoples around them used to practice. And the Levites, or the priests at the time, said, no, we're going to do something different. We're not going to do what they do. But again, you have to know ancient history, Near Eastern history, different cultural repertoire. You have to know all of that to read into it correctly. A main thing to mention, and then I'm going to stop for some questions. Bible verses are not fortune cookies. Okay, as soon as you pull one out and put it on a sign, you have ruined it. Okay, you would not do that to Harry Potter. You would not do that to John Grisham. Okay, you should not do it with the Bible. Okay, because there is a such thing as context. What comes before it? What comes after it? Who's writing it? Who's writing it for? What's the chapter about? All of that is relevant. So if you just take one line out, right, and you don't understand the cultural understanding, you don't understand the historicity, right? And what I tell my students is, When you learned Shakespeare, did you just get to interpret it on your own? Or did you have a teacher to tell you the idiomatic expressions that Shakespeare was using? When Shakespeare says all the world's a stage, did you think that the world was actually a flat piece of board with stairs and an audience? No, you didn't, because you understood what that meant because the teacher told you what that was. If you don't have the right teacher who's telling you what that was, you can just come up with anything you want. Doesn't mean it's right. So we're going to talk about context next. Questions?
Well, I have a quick comment. I have a couple. I'm a lifelong educator. I taught middle school and high school. So I've taught, Romeo and Juliet to 8th graders and
Yes.
9th graders. And, when I explain to the kids that when Shakespeare says sword in this context, he is not talking about swords. My students suddenly were like, wait, hold on. Like, they were like, Miss, we don't want, this guy's so old, this isn't relevant to us. But, when you are able to tell them what he really means, then suddenly they're like, I can't get enough Shakespeare. And now, of course, in Arizona, we want to, stop children from even learning about Shakespeare because it's just like too risque. Anyway,
Right.
The other comment that I have is that biblical verses are not fortune cookies and context matter. That should be a bumper sticker. So I'm just going to throw, if we decide to print those, we'll split it 50-50.
Fantastic. Love it. Yeah.
Let's see. Here's one from John, and I don't know. I haven't read it yet. So let's see. Another extreme irony: to distort Stone Age texts to make them coincide with your sexual inhibitions and simultaneously ignore the main message of the New Testament, which is to renounce all worldly possessions. Consider the lilies of the field. This is what Christopher Hitchens called a la carte Christianity. So more of a comment. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Iron Age, not Stone Age, but the same words. Yeah.
This one's from Ian. Ian says, does the Bible happen to say anything about Cracker Barrel? I suddenly have some questions.
No, but I know that certain people in this country are now losing their minds about Cracker Barrel, which is just lovely to see.
Yeah, so there's one more comment. Obviously, we get our irony from the Iron Age. So, all right,
yes,
go ahead.
Fantastic. Okay. We've got 15 minutes, and I'm going to try to roll through this because it is a lot. Please know that if I don't hit everything or if I'm going too fast, this presentation I will make available. I'm happy to send that, and you can do that. Go to my website, send me an email. I will always answer it. Okay, but I'm going to try to burn through this to get you as much info as you can to get the most out of this session. So if I'm going too fast, that's fine. You'll get the presentation. You can ask me whatever you like. Okay. I want to be respectful of your time though. So the book of Leviticus, this is what I call rational thought. We're not talking about biblical literalism. We're not talking about that it came down from Sinai. That's fine if you have that idea. But in the real world, in scholarship, we know that it's manuscripts put together, edited, redacted. We know that specifically as to why things are repeated. There's contradictions. There's all kinds of contradictions in the Bible itself, in the Torah itself, but the book of Leviticus specifically is. And the particular manuscript, right, it was canonized in the 1st century. The manuscript was chosen as late as the 7th century. So we're not talking about things that were put in stone thousands and thousands of years ago. This was simply how it went, right? Scholarship shows us that the original Leviticus, right, what we would call proto-Leviticus, before it was sewn together with ideological overlay and canonized into the Torah, most likely stood alone and was a priestly manual, meaning that it was only meant to, all those commandments were only meant to refer to the priesthood, not to a normal Israelite. The priesthood during the Near East and the kingdoms was very, very high above Israelites, a class among itself. We certainly still keep some of this today when you talk about Kohanes and Levites on those different aspects of the priesthood, right? You can't be near a dead body. There are things that you can't do. You have to keep super pure, right? The Levites were also the doctors, all that sort of stuff. So, and the other thing we have to remember is that the laws of the Torah, most likely, some of them weren't even followed, right? There are some that talk about stuff that just didn't happen during that time. Most likely, some of them were a wish list. Leviticus is basically one of those, right? Is that if the priests followed all these laws at all, scholarship shows that, as I said, they're held to a much higher standard, right? There's sacrifice, purity, specifically the holiness code, Leviticus 17 through 26, in which both the clobber passages live. So what I've heard from certain Christian literalists or certain anti-LGBTQ people is that the New Testament does sort of say that the Old Testament is outdated, except for the holiness code, which is absurd. But so if you're looking at it from that point of view, that originally this was a priestly manual. This is how to keep a priest pure, away from desecration and abomination, to separate themselves from things that are unholy. But then it's mixed together, right, with the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers. Then you have the wilderness sojourn all through there, and you have to sew it all together and redact it. You lose that, right? And all of a sudden, it applies to everybody, and that screws everything up. Who were the priests? Really quick, right? These are the descendants of Aaron. They were from the southern kingdom, which survived past 712, I think, when Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians, and is finally destroyed in 586. Yeah, 722. Destroyed in 586, 587 by the Babylonians, right? They knew, if you know the documentary hypothesis, meaning that the priests knew some of what the J and E texts are. If you look up the documentary hypothesis, you will, specifically Richard Friedman, you will get a crash course on that. But basically, they knew the stories of Genesis, they knew the stories of Exodus, probably not Exodus, but certainly a lot in Genesis, right? So they knew that stuff, right? More importantly, the priests lived in a world of binaries. And here's where we get to why these passages about homosexuality appear, okay? Scholarship now understands that the same author or authors or school of thought that produced the book of Leviticus also produced Genesis 1, meaning the creation story, the first creation story, not Genesis 2:3, which is the completely different creation story, right? And all you have to do to get into the mind of the priest is read Genesis 1. There's sun and moon, there's light, there's darkness, there's earth, there's sky, there's water, there's sky, there's male and female, right? Now, this is the God created male and female, right? Things that are holy to the priests are binary and they're separated. You can't have sun and moon together, right? They separate the waters from the sky, right? The mayim from the shamayim, right? Mayim water, shamayim heavens, right? You separate male and female. This is the mindset of Genesis 1, which we now know, based on Hebrew understanding and scholarship, was most likely written by a priestly source. So when we see that, we start to go back to Leviticus and see if we can continue and see, are there other binaries? By gosh, there are, right? Leviticus 19:19, you shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seeds. You shall not put on clothes from two kinds of materials. What we're seeing here is that the priestly understanding of order, right? Genesis 1 is completely about order, putting things in where they belong, the categories of where they belong. The priests do not want anything mixed together, right? What I always tell people at the end of these lessons that I teach is the priests aren't homophobic. They felt the same way about homosexual behavior as they did from wearing cotton and polyester. It just doesn't work in their binary mindset and their ideas of order and chaos, holiness and abomination. We have to think about their mind of who's writing it, who's thinking about it, what's their worldview. And once we understand that that's their worldview, Leviticus 18 and 20 make a whole lot of sense. Besides the who knows what a Zachar is versus an Ish, they don't want you to mix it together, because in their particular theology, a very specific priestly theology, it is not shared by the other Israelites, it is not shared by the Deuteronomic writer. It is not shared by the prophets. This particular theology only works in binaries. So once we look at it that way, there is nothing malicious about these clobber passages if you understand the context and where they come from. Finally, if we look at the context itself, I'm going to get back to this in a second. Here's the context, okay, of Leviticus 18. Let's look at the verses before and the verses after, right? We look at a few verses before. You don't let any of your offspring be offered up to Molech. I'll talk about him in a second. Do not profane the name of God. Now remember, the Torah doesn't have verses. The Torah doesn't have chapters. It's just one line after another, okay? So if you were reading this the way you were reading any other book, you'd say, okay, these laws have something to do with Molech, okay? Then it says, don't lie with a male as one lies with a woman. Then it says, don't have carnal relations with any beasts. So that answers your question. That's why there's two separate things for it, right? You defile yourself. Likewise for a woman, don't lend herself to a beast. It's perversion. Do not defile yourselves in any this way, right? For it is such that the nations I am casting out before you defiled themselves. Again, it's not because it's bad for no reason. It's because Israelites are supposed to be different. They're supposed to be separate. Don't be like the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Assyrians. We're not going to do that. Now, when it comes to Molech, right? Oh, goodness gracious. I went too far. Come on, scoot over there. There we go. Molech is a Canaanite deity, right? It translates to king, right? But basically, it's an idol. It's idol worship. So the context of that Leviticus 18 is talking about this is what the idol worshipers do, right? This is what those who worship Molech, not God, right? Our God here, do, right? And we're not going to do that, right? It's not an abhorrence because it's immoral. It's an abhorrence because we're different. We're not going to be like the Canaanites. We're going to make our own stuff, right? Again, looking back at the context, 1819 discusses menstrual cycles. 1820 is about adultery. 1821 talks about child sacrifice, right? We're not going to do that. And the context of homosexual behavior there, if it is homosexual behavior, we don't really know, is this is what the Canaanites do, which is true. The Canaanites and the other Near Eastern worlds, all up into Greek and Roman time also, right? All had homosexual relationships, right? There's a priestly prohibition here. It's basically, it's not Israelite practice, right? And what other scholars are saying specifically about offering children to Molech, right, from 1821, from Leviticus 1821, offering children to Molech, we've realized that while child sacrifice was practiced, right, we're talking about this particular verse is talking about a ceremony where you're passed over a fire, right? You're not actually sacrificed, but you're actually transitioning over in a basically a conversion to worship Molech, right? So the Levites here, the priests, are worried that you're going to follow the practices of Canaanites and follow the gods of Canaan. You're going to do another tribe's worshiping ways, which they do, right? They do have men lying with men, and they do have sex with beasts, apparently, and they do, they don't have that sort of separation of holiness, right? So the writer who's writing this, who, by the way, has intense historical distance from where we are in terms of morality, in terms of their understanding of the world, right? These are people who thought that it rained when God was happy, okay? So they're talking about, in the context here, don't do what the other nations are doing. And we see this all over the Torah, right? Don't follow their nation's laws, follow ours. Don't do this, do this. This is bad, this is a curse, this is a blessing. That is so prominent in terms of the thought process of the authors of the Torah that how can we miss it? That, of course, this has nothing to do with malicious ideas against homosexuality, but simply we don't do it. Other people can do it, we're not going to do it. So this, which I'm happy to give you, this sort of spells it out. so you can read it later, but it basically says everything that I've that I've just said. Last comment, and then I'm going to go. Today, in case you were wondering, it's not just fundamentalist Christians who are ignoring the context, Ezekiel, all that sort of stuff. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, Hasidim, Haredim, and things like that, they take the Torah literally and spiritually as God's word. And so there's not a lot of interpretation from scholarship and context and things like that. They ignore commentaries and they simply read it in terms of their biblical literalism as well. There's also a big stigma of homophobia in there. So I want to let you know that this is not just within fundamentalist Christians and Christian nationalism. Jews have these problems as well. Obviously, everything else is very, very accepting of LGBTQIA, especially the reform movement, to which I belong proudly. But conservative, reconstructionist, renewal, open orthodoxy, modern orthodoxy, it's all good, or they're moving in that direction. It's only those who have separated themselves with fundamentalism as well. So I want to make sure that I mention that as well, so that you think that I'm not just picking on Christians here. But what I'm going to give you here is my website, where you can find some of my writings about this, events like this that I'm going to do, and my Twitter, where you can go nuts and see all my threads,
They're funny.
have fun and all that stuff. But we have a few minutes, so please hit me with some questions so I can let you guys go and respect your time.
Well, that was really great. I do really enjoy, I love when I know people who know scripture the way that you do and the different translations. So this was a really, really great presentation. There's one question in the Q&A from Mark, and I may have missed what he's referencing here. Didn't the whole spilling the seed play into the abomination?
Not from a Jewish point of view. That came with Paul. That came with the First Corinthians. Spilling your seed was never really a huge deal within Judaism, and not connected to these particular verses of Leviticus. This is in terms of separation. Again, that's through the lens of sexual immorality, which these texts don't speak about specifically.
So I don't, there's just a lot of compliments here. Thanks so much. I learned a lot. Somebody said something about it being like a comedy show today because it was funny.
Oh, good. I try to make it entertaining. I mean, it's heavy stuff, but like, when you're talking about this, it's almost so absurd, right? When we're actually learning about these things, that it's ridiculous that they would say the Bible's clear. Anyone who says the Bible's clear hasn't read it. There's nothing clear in the Bible.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to use, Paul certainly was a cranky old Jew, wasn't he? That's from New Mexico, guys.
Wasn't a Jew for long, but yeah.
I want to just point out that, folks, for those of you who are looking for an opportunity to get active in your community, this kind of, non-textual or contextualized mentions of scripture in the Bible is happening every 2 weeks in the Peoria Unified School District. Like there's a woman from Turning Point USA who shows up all over the state, not just here in Maricopa County, but all throughout the state. Her name's Tiffany Benson. And last night she said that secularists are grossly misinformed. That there is a separation of church and state because nowhere in our Constitution does it say that. And then she was bold enough to actually pass out pocket constitutions, just like we have, to prove to them that it's not in the Constitution. She even read the First Amendment in its entirety and still asserted that it's not in the Constitution. It was really shocking. And she ended by saying, she called all of us anti-hetero, which I think is adorable because I'm heterosexual. And she said that only fools say there is no God. So
at least she's open about it.
Yeah, well, she's a paid, she works for Turning Point USA anyway, and they show up and the men have Adolf Hitler haircuts. It's horrible. And one of them actually started screaming at a board member last night, and she was afraid. And they have police officers there because these people are scary. So this is my push for all of you to stay engaged at the local level. But of course, I want you all to support Rabbi Mike too, because again, his work is really good. His Twitter is fire. He goes after people and never misses a beat. And so, Rabbi Mike, like, because sometimes these talks are a little bit heavy and we're all going into the weekend, hopefully to have margaritas or some kind of beverage that we enjoy or hang out by a pool or something. What gives you hope in these troubled times?
I would say groups like this, organizations like this, people in the chat who are open, willing to learn, people who have done the brave work of separating themselves or removing themselves from toxic or sheltered communities or families, breaking the cycle of religious abuse and that sort of thing. I'm very, very humbled by those people who have done that hard work and are now trying to help other people. So, and the other thing that gives me hope is that I have to remember that the loudest voice isn't always the biggest voice, and we're just not as loud. And I haven't yet figured out why that is. I think some of us are not crazy, and we're just fine with everything, and so we're just like, yeah, I don't care, why would I go to a school, but sure, it's fine. And then we realize it's not fine, like today, and now we have to do it. But we're not the minority here in America, and I think that's an important thing to remember, because if you're looking at social media, it can feel like that, and if you're looking at these laws that are being passed, it can feel like that. But the truth is, they're being passed by the small group and influence from small groups that just want this power, and we just have to turn it up a little bit.
It's true. And you can do that a whole bunch of different ways. You don't necessarily have to show up and give a big old speech or anything. You could even just email the board members and say, thank you for not discriminating against our trans students, or thank you for, approving scientific curriculum instead of creationist curriculum, or whatever. There are a couple of compliments here real quick that Gabby says, make sure you take Mike's classes, because that's right. Mike offers classes, and I think the beginning fee for a course is $1. So, because there was one I was going to try to attend, it was something about LGBTQIA rights, and but I had a conflict. So I need to keep checking your website, because if it's this enjoyable, I'm definitely going to want to sign up. And then there's one, I would say, last question here. And this comes from John. He said, great explanations. Thanks very much. On a side question, why is it that rabbis have the highly admirable characteristic of not proselytizing?
So I talk about proselytization in my book. There's a whole chapter on it. But basically, when Christianity got a hold of the government outlawed proselytization from any other religion, including Judaism. So Jews have not proselytized, not that we did a lot anyway,
right,
but we have not proselytized for over 2,000 years. And in fact, there's stories about how we're supposed to turn someone away for 3 times. There's a Jewish conversion takes a year to 2 years, right? It's not just water, welcome. And so it's a hard journey. You have to learn a new language. And then, when I do conversions, I check in every month. Is this still what you want to do? Is this the right reason? We really want to make sure that Judaism is the right thing for you, and that you were the right thing for Judaism. And that takes at least a year, right? And it takes tons of books and tons of writing and changing your whole life. So of course, when someone comes up to me and says, I want to be a Jew, I got to say, are you sure? Because what you're asking is and so besides that, proselytization in my view and other people's view is basically imperialism, mental imperialism, the destruction of other people's culture. It is basically a religious genocide, saying the way you are is illegitimate and you should be like me. Your culture should be destroyed. And so that in Judaism does not click. And so we're very, very open. And so that doesn't work for us. Again, I've got all kinds of stuff on proselytization. But yes, it's mental imperialism. It's, and it's cultural genocide, basically. So, but yes, we're not into proselytization. One last thing I wanted to mention in terms of the separation between church and state, I gave you a little Wikipedia article of the Treaty of Tripoli, which specifically tells that it's not a Christian country. Again, very much like the cherry picking in the Bible, they like to cherry pick the Constitution and U.S. history as well. So have those rebuttals ready, throw them at Thanksgiving dinner, throw them at the State House, and you know, say Rabbi Mike told me this and he's right. So, you know. Yeah.
Well, and I think, okay, so we've got 2 bumper stickers: Bible verses are not fortune cookies, and proselytizing is imperialism. So with that, I think that's a good way to end. If we ever do decide to print those, like I said, we'll have a collab on that, because it's all
Yeah.
you.
All right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was super fun. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do from Secular AZ all the way over here in Indiana.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for coming. Remember, we're not going to be here next Friday, but if you have the opportunity on Wednesday and Thursday, Wednesday, we're going to be in Tucson. Thursday, we're going to be in Phoenix. And then this next weekend, we're going to be in Bisbee. So we'll see y'all when we see y'all. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.